Today we're going to be talking about Nehemiah, the great wall builder. Behind me stands a nice stone wall. It's decorative, but it's also protective. It serves a purpose to demarcate boundaries and to protect and hold things back and keep people in or keep things in. Walls are iconic in architecture throughout history. Think of the Great Wall of China or the Berlin Wall. Think about all of the different walls that have been constructed over history. The famous ones that have been used to protect, to mark boundaries, to keep things out and keep people in. Think about walls. They could be built with stones. They could be built with wood or metal. They can be built with plastic, or they can be built with sandbags to hold back floodwater. Walls serve an interesting purpose in history, and today we will look at Nehemiah, who helps build the walls of Jerusalem to restore the dignity and the protection of the people living inside. Let's take a look today. If you've never had a chance to read through Nehemiah, I would encourage you to read at least through the first 4 chapters today. We're going to be talking through those chapters about who Nehemiah was, what he did, and how God worked through him. Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king. A cupbearer's role was an important one in the court of the king. The cupbearer was a confidant, was an advisor, and was the king's tester. The king would have food brought before him, drinks, and anything that he wanted. The cupbearer was the one who would test all of that food to make sure it wasn't poisonous. The cupbearer's role in the history of kingdoms and empires was a significant one. And today we're looking at Nehemiah, who was a cupbearer to the king. What's unique about a cupbearer is not only was he a confidant to the king, but his position wasn't one of nobility or of military prowess or might. It was a simple job, but one that was very important. And because he was the cupbearer, Nehemiah had the ear of the king at all times. He was in constant conversation and relationship because he was always with the king. We see in Nehemiah today that this cupbearer had a broken heart for the people of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. And because of his position as a cupbearer, he had a unique role. Let's read together. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, "Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire." Before we read verse 4, the background to this is Ezra and Zerubbabel had gone back to help rebuild and restore the temple and the city itself. Some exiles had gone back as well to the city, and it was there that they found their homes and everything destroyed. They had been exiled in Babylon, and as the Persians came and took over Babylon, the Persians let the Israelites go back. And Nehemiah seems to be one of the remnant left over in Persia, awaiting his chance to go back. But in the meantime, he heard some distressing news, some news that made him distraught. The city was destroyed, its people were hurting. The exiles are in a bad way. And we see in verse 4 of Nehemiah chapter 1, Nehemiah's response. He says this, "When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." We think about Nehemiah's response here. Nehemiah was broken over the condition of Israel, condition of Jerusalem, and the people of Israel. He was broken. He was distraught, and he sat down and wept. And notice his response after he wept as he prayed. He prayed to God about the issue. I think it's important when we see here at the beginning of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a story all about this cupbearer who comes from an unlikely place to do an awesome thing. And the cupbearer here he's passionate about the Lord. He's passionate about God, and he's passionate about his people. He doesn't want them to hurt. He doesn't want them to be in pain and distress. He wants them to thrive. He wants worship of God to be restored. His first response is to weep, and his second is to pray. I think it's an appropriate response when we find things that are distressing in the world today. We think about all of the troubles that we face, and we think about troubles that are faced in the world. We think about poverty. We think about inequality, social inequality. We think about people who are fighting for jobs and for their lives in certain countries. We think about people who are sick and dying. And now, while we know we can't fix all of those things, we do know somebody who can: God. And as people who believe in the one true God, it's important that our response is not only brokenness at all of the distress and the pain and the anger and the hurt and the inequality around us, but our response is to go to God and ask Him for help. And that's what Nehemiah did here. We know in the story that Nehemiah's distress was seen by the king. He brought in the king's wine, and the king looked at him and, "What is wrong, Nehemiah? What's wrong with your face? Why are you so sad?" And Nehemiah said, "King, I don't want to bother you with my issues." But the king insisted, "Please tell me what's wrong." And Nehemiah said, My people are hurting. My city's destroyed. And I'm here in Persia, and I can't do anything about it. My heart's desire, King, is to go back to Jerusalem and help them rebuild the walls and establish a city that's thriving. And the king said, "That's your wish? I want you to go for it." And the beautiful thing about the rest of chapter 1 is that the king and Nehemiah have this conversation, and the king authorizes Nehemiah to leave and to go back. And he gives Nehemiah orders to take timber and to get people who can build, artisans and craftsmen who can create and construct the city walls. And he gives Nehemiah a note of passage that says, "Nehemiah, if anybody bothers you, here is my signature. Here is my letter of affirmation. You can go and take this note to them and tell them, I have given you my blessing." The king was all on board with restoring Jerusalem and providing for the people. In that moment, Nehemiah's heart turned from sadness to joy. He could feel the anxiousness and the excitement and the passion to go back and help his people and the city. You know, I think about the situation and what our response is in times of distress. Are you and I broken over the things around us that just seem so distressing and so frustrating? And do we go to the Lord in prayer? You see, it wasn't Nehemiah who gave the king this idea. It was God who gave the king this idea. God was the one who gave the king the desire and the passion to help Nehemiah out. God was the one orchestrating all of it. As we continue on in Nehemiah, we come to Nehemiah chapter 2. Nehemiah chapter 2 tells us that Nehemiah was one who brought passion to the people and gave them the ability to see that they could accomplish all of the things that they were trying to do. Nehemiah chapter 2 tells us in verse 13 that Nehemiah went out. Let's read together. "By night I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem which had been broken and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through, his horse. So I went up the valley by night, examining the wall, and finally I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or the officials or any others who would be doing the work." You see, one of Nehemiah's strengths as a leader was that he was willing to assess the situation before just jumping right in and getting to work. Nehemiah, not only did he weep over the city and pray to God, but he went back anxious and eager, but strategic. He was willing to assess the walls, and he did it at night. Nothing was going on in the city. It was quiet in the city. He was able to mount his horse, go out into the city on the outside and examine what needed to be done. It was in this moment of examination that he realized how bad the city really was. And it broke his heart a second time. And what we see here, I think, is a truth for us to really think through. Is that when God calls us to do something, it's important that we take time to assess and process what needs to be done. But then also, in our assessment, And in our zeal, we can rally people around us who can help, who can be a part of the ministry and the service to the Lord. That's a significant part of this story, is recognizing that Nehemiah's leadership was a phenomenal part of who he was. It allowed him to be the type of leader who could rally people and get things done. We see in verse 17 that he went back to the people of Israel and he told them the situation of the walls. And what we read in verse 17 is this: "Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." Man, the passion in Nehemiah's voice. As he talked with the people, he said, come, let's build this together. Let's reconstruct these walls. We need protection. We need to be a city that's strong and fortified. But even beyond that, we're a city that's disgraceful right now. And we need to be a city that's not disgraceful. Why would Nehemiah say something like that? Right? Why would walls really matter that much? Well, as I mentioned before, walls were intended to be part of fortification and boundary. Walls were also magnificent and showed a town or a city's might and strength, showed their craftsmanship and artisanship, and helped keep those enemy forces out. Jerusalem was God's city. It was where he had his temple and where the people worshiped God. And so Nehemiah equated the wall's destruction with disgrace to God. You know, I often wonder if we think of things in those terms. Right? We think holistically about our lives and ask ourselves, do the things that we have represent and reflect our passion, our love, and our worship of God? For Nehemiah, something as simple, we would think, as walls were something so important to him because it demonstrated disgrace to the nations around them. We're no longer a strong people. We're no longer an organized people. We're no longer a people who have this magnificent force and this God protecting us. We're weak and wounded and destroyed. But Nehemiah looked at the people and said, I want to restore the beauty and the splendor. I want to rid us of our disgrace. Let God be once again worshiped and honored in this city, so that the people around will say, Jerusalem is God's city, and Israel is God's people. Man, that's something I want to jump on board with, right? You think about the passion that Nehemiah had. You think about the energy and the excitement. He didn't want to just rebuild because it was something fun to do or he had time to do it. He wanted to do it to bring God honor. Which brings us to our third and final point today. You know, when we find ourselves in these situations and we want to bring God honor, we want to bring God glory, there's always somebody or something that's just kind of nagging behind the scenes. It's going to try to interfere and conflict with what our goal is. We see that in Nehemiah chapter 2. Let's keep reading. Nehemiah chapter 2 in verse 19. But then Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard about it, and they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this you are doing? They asked. Are you rebelling against the king? Listen to Nehemiah's response. I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. Man, Nehemiah's words there, his passion, his energy, and his excitement, and his zeal for the Lord, it was so powerful. We look at these three men who came and said, Nehemiah, what are you doing? What are you trying to accomplish? You know you're going to fail. Just like everybody else has failed, you're going to be a failure too. But Nehemiah said, no, that's not the case. I am not going to be a failure. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring honor and glory to the Lord, and God is going to grant us the ability to rebuild this city. Man, so powerful to think through. And this is why Nehemiah was such a courageous, strategic, passionate, and dignified leader. As we look at Nehemiah, we see that God's leader encourages and excites the people in the face of opposition. He gets them passionate for their work. Nehemiah chapter 4 and verse 11 we read this. Also our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and we will kill them and put an end to the work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. Therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall, at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords and spears and bows. And after I looked these things over, I stood up and said to the nobles and officials and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Nehemiah's affection for the city and affection for the Lord drove him to realize that God was in charge of it all. And even though those 3 men stood in opposition, and they had plotted to go and fight the Israelites before they rebuilt the city, Nehemiah said, stand strong and stand firm. Be patient, protect. And why? Because we know that the Lord is awesome and mighty. The Lord is good, and He will protect us. It's a beautiful story, Nehemiah chapter 4, as we conclude our time talking about his leadership ability. You know, we think about leaders, and we think about all of the tasks that you and I have been called to do. The question that I would ask is, do you trust the Lord even in times of great difficulty? Are you looking to God to solve the issues that you face? Are you looking to Him first? Are you looking to Him second? And are you looking to Him third? Are you looking to God to help you in the times where you are frustrated and anxious and even scared? You know, the psalmist says, when I am afraid, I will trust in Him. I think it's a powerful statement when we see Nehemiah standing there with his fellow Israelites, sword in hand, spears behind him. We will stand to defend this city. It is God's city. You are my people, and I am going to help protect you, because I know that God in His glory is more important than my life. But I also know that God will do what He sees best, and He will protect us during this time. I don't know where you are in life. I don't know the difficulties you face. I know it seems like we've been talking a lot about this in our recent lessons, but one of the beautiful things about Scripture in many ways is it can be repetitive. And I think there's a truth in the repetition. It's that God understands the situations we face, and He knows that we need to hear this over and over and over again to remind ourselves, to be reminded that God is in control. This week, as you go out into the world, be reminded that God is in control. His glory matters first and foremost, and you are called to seek Him out whenever you need help.